Three, two, one. Okay. Welcome to another episode of the Silk and Steel podcast. I'm your host, Carl Zad. Today we have a very special guest, Peter Lee, aka Chinahand. Peter, I have been following you for the longest time. I think since the days when you were writing for Asia Times. And I remember at that time, like, who is this guy? He seems to know China very well, but this guy writes very differently from what I'm used to, like American observer of China. That's why at one point I thought maybe you're Korean, like Peter Lee. That could be like a Korean American name. Until I saw your YouTube channel, I'm like, oh, okay, it's the other Lee. So welcome, Peter, to my channel, and could you just briefly introduce yourself to my audience?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been doing the China-related thing now for 50 years because I started in 1974 in school, and then in 1979 I started going to China on business for a Japanese trading company. Went all over China, did all sorts of things, and then in 2003, I think it was, I started blogging on China at a thing called China Matters. Then I started to write for Asia Times. Then I started to do a channel for Newsbud, and now I'm doing my own thing. I have a Patreon, Peter Lee's China Threat Report, and I beat it to death on Twitter too, at China Hand.
That's a great handle, by the way.
I
It's
don't know
good
how
you
I
got in.
got.
It's good you got in early. And I think you actually deserve that handle. There are a lot of AK so-called China experts out there. I mean, they barely even speak a word of Mandarin. What I want to ask you about today, you have like such a breadth of knowledge, but the thing I'm particularly interested in is this tweet I saw you recently tweeted out on the U.S. grand strategy for Middle East. I think many people are aware of the Abraham Accords and the U.S. strategy of trying to tie Saudi Arabia and Israel together to counter Iran, but not many people are aware of the China angle in this. And I think you kind of nailed it on the head. So I will let you talk about your you have this you had a whole article on this. So I'm not gonna steal your thunder. So I'll let you talk about it.
Yeah, well, my interest in this topic started with bewilderment because why isn't anybody talking about this? The back in I guess it was March of last year, uh, China brokered a pretty important agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and it basically went right by everybody because the Biden administration and the press, I don't think, wanted to give it a lot of play because it was kind of embarrassing. And so that sort of put the whole issue of what would Jake Sullivan do faced with that situation. And I figured he'd do something pretty much like how things played out in the middle of last year. But then what really astounded me was how they stuck to their guns and tried to keep on doing a strategy of splitting off Saudi Arabia from China in the midst of this horrific operation in Gaza. I would have thought they would have cut their losses or something, but instead, the most remarkable thing to me in recent American policy has been the absolutely unapologetic and wholehearted support for Israel in what it's doing in Gaza, which looks and walks and talks and clucks a lot like genocide. And, no previous US president had done that. Reagan didn't do it. Going even further back, Carter and Clinton didn't do it. G.W. Bush didn't do it. Herbert Walker Bush didn't do it. Obama didn't do it. But here we have totally unapologetic, support, not just moral support or support in the press, but material support in the unlimited supply of arms as well as diplomatic cover for this operation. And that has gotten me to speculating on why it is so important to the United States that this process continue, even at the hands of a Israeli prime minister Benjamin Netanyahu that they absolutely despise. Shall I continue?
Yes, please. I'm waiting. I'm waiting.
Okay. Well, the the essence of the problem, as I see it, is that Jake Sullivan decided he wanted to do a new clean break. Well, I don't know if you're old enough to remember the old clean break, which was with Dick Cheney and a bunch of neocons like Paul Wolfowitz, and their idea was that we will use American power to remake the Middle East into a tractable asset of the United States, particularly on the issue of control of oil. And I don't know if many people's
I
memories go that far back for this either, but a
I'm
key
old
link.
enough. I was just
You were
starting
there.
my first job out of college when Iraq War got started,
Oh
and I
boy.
was actually quite surprised when I finally read Alan Greenspan's memoir when he said, "Oh, United States did not go in Iraq to grab oil. Rather, we went in to dictate the flow of the oil where it should go, and
Mhm,
particularly in that juncture, that's when." U.S. is becoming more and more energy self-sufficient, whereas
mhm,
China was starting to import more and more from Middle East. So they wanted to control the Middle East oil flow so they can counter China. I was actually surprised to reading Alan
yeah, that's
Greenspan's memoir back in 2000s because in 2003, a lot of people really didn't think much of China. Because I remember in September 1999 there was a famous article in Foreign Policy, I think Policy magazine by a China scholar Gerald Segal said, "Does China matter?" And in
mhm,
this piece, he argued, no, China doesn't matter. China is just a middle power like Brazil, and you should be treated as one.
mhm,
United States should treat China just like it treats Brazil. And this come right after the U.S. bombing of Chinese embassy in Belgrade in May 1999. So it's quite remarkable that few years later, the big heads in under Cheney already thinking about containing China
mhm.
via Middle East, via control of Iraqi oil. So I was shocked by that. But what I was also shocked by is how like the remarkable consistency of the U.S. policy. I mean, we in the papers we all read how incompetent U.S. was in carrying out this policy, the
Mhm.
implementation of the actual occupation of Iraq. But these armchair generals who are playing like game of risks across the world stage, they were thinking far ahead. They were thinking back in 2003 about how to contain China when the rise of China was still kind of on the horizon. I was surprised by that. And then what you brought up about Jake Solomon's effort in the Middle East trying to bring Saudi Arabia and Israel together also reminds me of what Jared Kushner did in doing the Abraham Accords one. That was under Trump's administration. So it's really there has been a consistent policy from the U.S. administration, from Trump to Biden, in its execution to at least toward China. I mean, I see that there's a consistency over there because Trump started the whole kind of contain China. Well, I mean, Hillary Clinton started it, but Trump really like brought it in the open. But Biden really followed through. So I was really surprised to read about that, and I thought, oh, okay, now, well, Biden might be on his way out, but Trump is coming back in, and and Abraham Accord was Jared Kushner's baby. Like they're probably still gonna try to make it work. But you are the expert, so I'm not gonna hog the airtime. Please, please.
Yeah, well, it was there was a classified study that's at the U.S. Naval War College out in Rhode Island. It was only published in two copies, and they got one over there, which was back in like 2000, which laid out the whole strategy of how, the Chinese energy imports were their key vulnerability and have to be interdicted. And of course, the Chinese knew that too. And so we've had this sort of game going on for the last 25 years of the Chinese trying to secure their near beyond, develop alternate oil resources, and the main thing is to do diplomatic efforts to make it more difficult for the United States to enforce an embargo of Middle Eastern oil. So, yeah, about Jared Kushner, though, I just think of him as an insane grifter. He and his buddy who were basically running this thing where they were going to give a lot of money to Israel and Indonesia and a lot of other places, and then he was going to get it on the back end. But the Jake's, yeah, it seems to me that the United States is always working on iterations of this policy, particularly as it relates to Saudi Arabia, to keep them on side or on res, as we say in the American Native American thing there. And it was pretty unsubtle in the old days, but under the Biden administration, they decided that we had to kind of up our game, which I interpret to say let's make new mistakes in a different and more complicated way. And so the key inflection point of that for me was another thing that wasn't really noticed very much in the Western press, and I will be interested to hear your comments on it. That was the infamous IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, which was announced on the sideline of the G20 meeting in September of last year. And that was something that even people at the time says this looks crazy bananas. Basically the idea was that they're going to build a alternative to BRI from scratch from India by shipping the stuff to the UAE. Then they were going to put it on a train. They were going to ship it across Saudi Arabia, and the tracks weren't built yet. I think they have to build like 2,000 miles of track in order to make that go. It was go through Jordan, and it was going to end up at Haifa. And of course, that the United States has worked industriously to kick China out of Haifa, and in fact, it was purchased by Indian Prime Minister Modi's top money bags, the Adani guy. So anyway, so this thing came out, and there was an interesting subtext to it. One thing, of course, was that it was this brainwave that was related to India. That was when we were still very big on India, and the idea was that we were going to marginalize the Belt and Road, marginalize Chinese production, and instead all these goodies would be made in India and they'd be shipped to Europe via this corridor, and basically freezing China out. So that was the big draw for India, was that they were going to get somehow this thing was going to get built, presumably with private money and with Saudi money, and they'd have their own direct channel into Europe. But the other angle to it was that it was supposed to be a boon to Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia has always said, "Oh, we got to get out of the oil business. We can't just pump it; it's going to run out sooner or later." And so, Prince Mohammed bin Salman has got these great ideas about how he's going to turn Saudi Arabia into a technical powerhouse, a technology powerhouse. Semiconductors. He's going to do AI. He's going to do all these good things, and he's going to build these gigantic smart cities out in the desert and that sort of stuff. And so that was supposed to be the lure for him, that if he signed on to Team America, he would get to get this transport corridor through Saudi Arabia. They'd be attracting investments, and they'd also be able to get the help of Israel. That was always the key kicker, because they couldn't do it without an Abraham Accord type of alliance with Israel. It would involve normalization of relations. And so this whole project hinged on the idea that Saudi Arabia would be ready to normalize relations with Israel. And that way, Israel would view Saudi Arabia as its preferred technology partner for this new high-tech Middle East kind of operation. And back before October 7th, the only little fly in the ointment was supposed to be the Palestinians, because MSB has no particular love for the Palestinians, but as guardian of the holy places of Mecca, he has to pay lip service to that. And so there was this understanding that we're going to sideline the Palestinians. We wouldn't involve them in the discussions. Israel will make some nominal concessions to them, pay some people off, and then we'll announce that everything's hunky-dory. We normalize relations, and this whole thing gets on track. But then October 7th came along, and knocked everything into a cocked hat. Now, my personal suspicion is that a key motivator for the Palestinians was the the fear of an Abraham Accord in between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which would basically cause the entire Arab Sunni part of the equation to slide over and recognize Israel, and the Palestinians would be permanently disenfranchised and getting beat up by the Israelis. And I'm not the only guy who thinks that. Uh, you know, President Biden also said one of the reasons that I think they did October 7th was to derail normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And the reason I take that seriously is because I don't think there's a lot of room in the Biden brain pan. And, I think that Jake Sullivan and those guys are sitting around obsessing on this issue. And, Joe just sort of like replays it, in his public discussions. He doesn't have that much filter left. And so I tend to treat that rather seriously. And also Palestinian jihad and also Iranian commentators make the same statement. In fact, they say, basically the Al Aqsa flood of October 7th basically saved their bacon. Otherwise it would have been a totally unfavorable trend, and Israel would have the whip hand throughout the Middle East.
Oh yeah, I mean that's my reading too. The Israel normalization of Israel among Arab world, that was a goal, and that was, and you say that is also a response to the U.S. response to the China broker Saudi Iran deal. I think that caught a lot of people by surprise. The Saudi Iran peace deal that was took
Yeah.
place in Beijing,
Mhm.
that came out of nowhere, and US was kind of scrambling trying to counter that, and their way to counter that is trying to uh, keep on driving the wedge between the Sunni Arab world leading by Saudi Arabia and
Mhm.
Iran, and Saudi, they're trying to play on the fear of the Saudi of the Iran, because all these Gulf countries, they have very few population, yet they're sitting on all these oil wealth, which is very close to
Yeah.
Iran, and they always are, and there's has have a lot of Shiite population in those oil producing regions, so they always had have a kind of little apprehension about Iran's intention. So the Washington's goal is to kind of derail basically because the China Iran peace deal would have meant that both sides will then settle down and happily sell oil and gas to China. Because China is the largest importer of energy from both places, and that's apparently not in the cards for U.S., because that U.S. is also worried about the status of the dollar, because Saudi Arabia has made some noise about they're gonna start trading oil in RMB with China, and that's apparently not acceptable for US. I don't. I think Saudi may just be using that as a negotiation card. I don't know if they were really serious about trading in yuan. I think they're just trying to remind US, hey, we have other options to turn to. We can turn to China, and but that made a lot of people in Washington very nervous, apparently, because dollar hegemony is one of the major pillars to supporting the U.S. empire enterprise, and you can't have the petrodollar being threatened. But I'm still what I just don't see how this can. I'm just surprised that the U.S. is still trying to revive this dead horse, because as far as I can tell, the expansion of Abraham Accord is dead in the water after October 7th. I mean, no Arab state is gonna, at this particular juncture, is gonna stand out and say we're gonna normalize relationship with Israel now. Just screw the Palestinians. I mean, nobody could do that politically, and I'm surprised that U.S. is still pursuing the same strategy. I mean, what's your take on that, Peter?
Yeah, I will confess bewilderment myself. I think I think it's dead in the water. Nothing's going to happen to it, and MBS is just yanking our chain. And one of the key indicators for me on this thing that I think probably depresses Jake Sullivan is that India has drifted away from this whole scheme. They were. It's interesting if you look at the map of all the different infrastructure corridor plays that are available to India. There's like 4 or 5 of them, and the one through Saudi Arabia is the worst of the lot. And just recently, as you know, Iran has invested heavily in the Chabahar port in Iran as its gateway into Western Asia and into Europe. And let me think. 2 months ago, they actually took over the port completely. They promised to invest $370 million in it, and they're going to operate it. They're also going to develop it and do all the new construction. And that takes them via Iran. It takes them to, ships go to Chabahar, and then they get on the train, go through Iran, go through Turkey, and bang, they're in Europe. And so I have a feeling that, the very ostentatious disgust of the United States for India recently is not just that they're buying oil from Putin, it's that they've completely or partially pivoted away from this IMEX scheme that was supposed to be the centerpiece of the U.S. remaking the Middle East. One other
But the
thing that
iMac is crazy. That thing is crazy to begin with. Like, why would you load your goods on a ship and then dock, unload, and put on a train, and then go to across a huge expansive desert, go to Haifa, then unload it again and reload on a ship, then go to Europe? Why not? Okay, I'm saying before the whole Yemeni blockade of Red Sea thing. I mean, it would have just make sense. Just keep it on the ship and sail straight to Europe. I mean, like,
exactly, or through the Suez Canal. One of the things about this is it's supposed to really mess with the Egyptians. They're not happy. But one of the there was a. It's funny when they were really pushing the normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Of course, the Wall Street Journal had a very informed backgrounder. I think it was back in May or something like that, and they said that basically it said that MBS Saudi Arabia had all these asks. They wanted a NATO Article 5 type collective security thing. So if they got attacked, everybody would pile on and attack the Iranians or whatever. And they wanted, access to nuclear technology, and they wanted the best fighter things. And also, apparently, they wanted an insurance that the U.S. would back MBS as next king, because apparently the CIA has been cultivating this other prince who is supposed to be, more, doesn't cut people up with bone saws and is more tractable. But the thing that the article said that was really interesting was that the United States had 3 asks of um, Prince Mohammed bin Salam, and they were all related to China. And the first one was no Chinese bases. The second one was no Huawei. And the third one, as you were discussing, was no denomination of Saudi oil sales in RMB. So that pretty much shows the cloven hoof in terms of what the United States was trying to accomplish with this deal here. It was supposed to swing Saudi Arabia away from the Chinese camp and put it into the U.S. camp, with the implication that Saudi Arabia, dependent upon U.S. arms and security, and not being able to do its China business in RMB, would be more amenable to pressure to, in the case of what we call a China contingency, to control the flow of oil or restrict the flow of oil to China. Because one of the more interesting articles that was written by a knowledgeable person whose name escapes me was that a pure military blockade that CENTCOM is always advertising that it can do to China with its energy imports is not realistic, because it doesn't take the political element into account. Even the United States is susceptible to diplomatic and political and economic pressure. And so in order to win the game of restricting Chinese exports, you have to, Chinese energy imports, you got to have a diplomatic united front, an economic united front, and you have to be able to control the flow of oil.
That's the same strategy that had since the Dick Cheney days, but
Uh,
like implementation is really poor.
yeah.
But
Well, they keep thinking, we're going to do this, and when we screw up, we learn and we do it different the next time. But they just end up screwing it up again the next time. It's really pretty bizarre.
do you think United States will be able to provide the security guarantee that? Okay, my son just joined the party. Do you think United States would be able to provide the security guarantee that Saudi is asking for? Because for Saudi Arabia, that's the utility of United States, is to provide the security guarantee for the continuation of the Saudi family's rule in Saudi Arabia, versus enemies, domestic and foreign, but I mean, like, is that a big ask, or do you think like U.S. will be able to fulfill their end of the bargain? I mean, NATO Article 5, that's pretty extensive, but still, I mean, like, couldn't conceivably United States wouldn't want any other power to control oil fields in Saudi Arabia, right? What do you think?
I thought that I'll turn my light on here because I'm sort of fading away. Okay, so anyway, yeah, I didn't really take that Article 5 thing seriously. I mean, he's expecting NATO to pile in there to bomb Iran, or we got plenty of people to bomb Iran already, But his main concern is that I think he's more worried about the U.S. deciding he's not the man for the job, and backing one of his princes. I don't see Iran as a major power extension factor in terms of attacking Saudi Arabia. I don't think that's where their heads are at right now. I think that they want to work the economic levers with China and more with India, and they're not less interested in blowing up the East-West pipeline and starting World War III. So I didn't take. I thought that for MBS, that was more of a show me how serious you are, and also give me an excuse for not going along with it if you don't give this. I think this is just a extended exercise in chain yanking.
That makes sense. I mean, as for U.S. demands, I think the number one is actually really easy. No Chinese bases in Saudi Arabia. I don't think China is interested to have military bases in Saudi Arabia. I mean, that's just like putting yourself in a hornet's nest. That was one of the reasons Osama bin Laden listed as why he turned against United States, is when U.S. put its military personnel and military bases in Saudi Arabia during the Gulf War. And that's an easy one. But no Huawei. What's U.S. offering? Alternative. I mean, like, that's U.S. is telling everyone to stay away from Chinese products. But what realistic alternative are you offering that can offer the same quality that Huawei offers, but at the same price? I mean,
well, it's a security thing, because the Five Eyes, their premise for any sort of enhanced intelligence sharing is that the networks have to be completely transparent to the Five Eyes, namely the NSA, and you cannot have like Huawei Kit in there. It's going to make it difficult for us to see what's going on, and also, of course, there's a possibility of a backdoor, which would allow China to get some intel goodies. The other thing, I don't know if you saw it or not, there was apparently a rumor that the reason that October 7th was such a surprise to Israel and the Mossad was because the Hamas and the other Palestinian forces were all using Huawei phones, and they hadn't figured out how to hack them and intercept the communications.
Wow. I mean, that's something to think about. But hold on to that thought, because I need to get my son out of here. He start dancing in the background. I'll be right back. I'll hand him to the babysitter.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna have a drink of water.
Okay, I'm back. I forgot to tell the babysitter I'm recording.
Oh, thank God you have a babysitter. My son has 2 kids, and, he's just being worn to a nub. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm just lucky because I live in Indonesia and the it's affordable. To have a full-time babysitter.
Yeah, he's in
So
New
I'm
Jersey,
grateful
and he
for
has
that.
a second mortgage. So,
That's what everyone tells me. I mean, that's
yeah.
what all my friends in the US right now telling me, like, how can you afford to have 2 kids and take care of them? I'm like, because I escaped. I escaped from LA.
Yeah.
uh, yeah. So
Mm,
okay, so back to the Saudi Arabia, US, and China. Now, I think the really interesting part is the US asked Saudi not to trade oil in yuan. I mean, like that's understandable, of course, because
mhm,
this is for United States. This is shifting away from recycling of petrodollars that was, laid down back in the days of Kissinger days when back then U.S. was actually a steel and manufacturing powerhouse. They would buy
mhm,
oil from Saudi Arabia, but then Saudi Arabia used that dollar to buy American products. So a lot of the US dollar actually end up recycled back to the United States. It was a virtuous cycle. But now, many years later in 2024, after the Wall Street had decided to hollow out the US manufacturing industry and ship them to China, now it makes sense for Saudi Arabia to trade in yuan so they can take those yuan and buy Chinese products directly. Whereas, if they trade in dollar, all they can do is invest in U.S. real estate or treasury
mhm,
bills. Well, that's what U.S. want. Of course, U.S. want to continually recycle the dollars back in the U.S. Treasury to support the U.S. economy. And they probably don't want. I think you pointed out they don't want the petrol wealth get recycled into the
mm,
Chinese economy, which reminds me of this clip I saw a few days ago that was circulating by the former U.S. ambassador to NATO. She was the U.S. ambassador to NATO under the Trump administration. Her name escaped me at the moment, but she was a senator from Texas, and she was making this speech. I think was must be from several years ago, and she basically said, "United States have a stronger economy, so we have this leverage to deter China." And China may have a growing military, they might have a growing navy, they may have nuclear weapons, but what if they have suffering internal problems? So our best bet is collapse of Chinese economy. That way we can deter China. I mean, this is actually consistent from what John Mearsheimer basically been proposing. John Mearsheimer said like if China economy goes south, then it's actually in his view that's will actually be good for peace. That means U.S. and China don't have to go to war if China's economy collapses on its own. What that strikes me again is kind of the consistency in the U.S. policy because that's what U.S. has been doing for the last few years, waging an economic warfare on China. Like all the sanctions and cutting off semiconductors. This is all served to, if not roll back, but at least slow down Chinese progress, right? I mean, this is so. I'm actually pretty impressed with their big strategy thinking, but somehow their their detailed implementation is always a screw up. I don't know how that happens. Your
mhm.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, as they say, the enemy gets a vote, right? In terms of you've got this brilliant strategy, and I think for ever since Xi Jinping took over, he's been predicating his policies on that. The Yeah, I saw that. I saw that clip. It was Kay Hutchison, who was the
Yes, yes.
ex NATO ambo, and I think that I'm hoping one of these days, if you can persuade him, you'll have what's his name, Sean Ryan on your show. He's the
Oh yes, I
investment banker, and basically, we have these overt so-called national security industrial policy justification for the fuckery that we do to China. But I see it more as a full spectrum thing to deny China markets, investment. Basically, this whole thing about the electric vehicles, I see that as basically wanting to make China choke on these vehicles. They can make a lot of them. They can make them very good. They could probably come up with a deal where they could work out something with the with the EU and maybe even the United States. But we just want them to be hanging in the wind. And part of that, I think, is trying to limit foreign direct investment. I'm not basically Xi Jinping and the CPC popped the real estate bubble, and they haven't. And I think that one reason or that they haven't been able to get past that very well is that the United States has rather cleverly counter-programmed in denying them overseas markets, to take away that growth story, take away the FDI, at least from the Western countries in the G7, and also, throw all this other crap at them. So yeah, I saw this. That's why I see the don't let Saudi Arabia buy Chinese sell oil to China with RMB is a rather central strategy because where does that money go? The Chinese have already set up ETF funds for the Saudis to be able to invest in the Chinese stock market. The this weird city that they were talking about building out in the desert in Saudi Arabia. What's it called, Neom or something like that? That was based on buying a lot of stuff from China. You know, and if they had more RMB than they knew what to do with, they'd be doing those projects big now. And Neom has gotten scaled back. And the Chinese are not seeing a lot of inflow into the Chinese stock market. By the way, this is sort of off topic, but I was looking that the P to E of BYD is 1/3 of that of Tesla's. And that's also true overall for the Shanghai Composite versus Nasdaq. I think that Sean Ryan, this guy, has always said Chinese stocks are undervalued, and I think it's true. And it's the Chinese are searching for ways to try to get some money into that market, and the United States is searching for ways to discourage people from getting in that market.
This is where I think US will not succeed because if, for example, we're talking about EVs, a lot of the Chinese EV production is ended up getting consumed domestically. Like the Chinese EV makers, domestic Chinese brands, 90% of their production is being taken up by Chinese consumers. Only like 10% is exported overseas. And the biggest EV export coming out from China is actually Tesla from their Tesla Shanghai factory. So this is why the US election will be very interesting because you have Elon Musk, who is fully behind Trump right now. And he has a very vested interest in China. He's a lot of his production is in China. In fact, Shanghai Gigafactory is what eventually made Tesla profitable.
Certainly wasn't that planned in San Francisco.
and the right now all the what 200-300% tariff that Biden is going to levy on the Chinese EV export, the Tesla is going to get hit because they're already alerting their consumers in Europe and US. Sorry, the price is going to go up because I mean so I don't see how. You will have impact, obviously, on the Chinese economy, but I don't think you will have the kind of the sizable impact that they were expecting. All these tariffs on EV, because right now the Chinese EV, the 10%, so 90% are consumed domestically, the Chinese EV
Mhm.
production. 10% are exported abroad. But among that 10%, most of them are going to global South countries. They're going
Yeah.
places like Thailand,
Mhm.
Mexico, Brazil.
Mhm.
So it's really a small fraction of the domestic brand Chinese EVs that's actually going to Europe, or I don't think it's coming to North America at all. But it's mostly Tesla and all the joint ventures. All
Mhm.
the joint ventures with with the Chinese. Their production is now being re-exported to their home market. So those ones are going to get hit. So yeah, again, I'm very impressed with their kind of far-sightedness in kind of planning out this whole big grand strategy of controlling the globe. But the devil is in the details. It's like I just don't see them successfully carrying out this one. But you did remind me, speaking about Saudi Arabia and Gulf countries, and you did mention your article. One of the goal for Saudi and the Gulf countries to diversify their economy away from oil and gas, and they wanted to branch into AI because that's AI is seen as the future, the driving of the fourth industrial revolution, and they have that means they have to import a lot of Nvidia chips to power their data centers. And United States just put a kind of slap on review on exports to Saudi Arabia and UAE AI data centers for quote unquote their fear that Chinese will find a backdoor way of
Mhm.
getting their hands on those Nvidia chips, because United States currently have a AI chip restriction export to China because they want to slow down China's AI development. So like this is yeah, I don't know how that's, again, this kind of, I don't know if this is just kind of negotiation, like hard US is playing hardball with Saudi Arabia, um or this is something they intend to follow through. I mean, because if they really want to stop um chip export to Saudi, that kind of goes counter to MBS plan of moving Saudi to the new economy. What do you think about that? What's your take on that?
Well, yeah, obviously the idea was that there are big there are big Chinese I'm sorry, Saudi investments in Chinese AI already. Like Aramco put $400 million into this Chinese venture, and the United States then called the Saudis on the carpet and said that if you want to have U.S. investment, you're going to have to divest from these China investments. So it's the usual thing, where they want to create a sphere of dependency, you know, on the United States and deny these areas to China. And apparently, I'm not an AI believer, sorry, but apparently, the United States government, they got some binder that says AI is what's going to put us over the top, going to keep us on top for another 20 years. Everybody will be making six-finger graphics, and they'll be turning to us for them. So that struck me as a sort of another one of those mega mind brainwaves. That's going to backfire. But the thing that I've always given my long experience in corporate America and in diplomacy, and I didn't work for a one of those McKinsey type companies, but I had encounters with them. And the thing is that the more complicated the strategy, the lower the chances of success, but the greater chances of employment. You fuck things up bad enough, they're going to hire you to fix them. And this is really what I see the entire Beltway apparatus in now. Like we have this incredible, Rube Goldberg 20-step thing for, keeping China out of the Middle East. It's not working. So we got to tweak it. So, more people have to be hired to do the tweaks. The tweaks don't work. We do more tweaks. So this is what they call the self-licking ice cream cone. Once the once the cone starts dripping, you lick it, makes it drip more, you lick more, lick, 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 and that's really what I see as America's problem right now. There's too much licking going on the ice
So,
cream cone, and not enough problem solving.
So all this containing China talk is just for grift. I mean, ultimately it's for grift. It's just another opportunity for the for getting to the tits of the whatever U.S.
Well,
taxpayer.
that's I have to admit that I do tend to that theory because basically we burned through the Soviet Union, we burned through Islamic terrorism, and the next big thing, the one that was going to put everybody's kids through college, that's China. And basically, I don't see India or Nigeria picking up the slack anytime soon. So yeah, I think and also the problem was, I may say, that my party, the Democrats, adopted the China threat narrative because they figured that would it would legitimize them as a party that cared about national security, and also using the national security pretext, it could do all these things that it wanted to do in terms of industrial policy and social policy and those things, and of course censoring the media.
Oh yeah, people like Matt Inglesia kind of put that more explicitly. He said China is what's going to pull America together right now. That's gonna build. This is how we're going to build solid group solidarity. Is this
Everybody hates
anti-China
China.
crusade?
That's
Yeah,
true.
but so speaking of which, we are approaching the election, and it looks like with the recent assassination attempt on Trump, it looks like Trump is going to win. I mean, his chances just skyrocketed. If
Mhm.
the election were held today, I'm pretty sure he will be elected. Uh, so, given the that now we're possibly looking at the second Trump turn, do you think the U.S. policy toward China will change significantly, including like its grand strategy in the Middle East?
Well, first of all, I don't know if you've been following it, but the Schumer apparently told Biden to step down, and he's a majority leader in the Senate, and I'd say that there's a good chance that Biden will be gonzo. He also announced today he has COVID, so that would sort of give him a health related reason to check out. So he might be running against Kamala, and quite frankly, it's you know there's so many people that hate Trump that any Democratic candidate, dead or alive, is going to do okay. It all boils down to the swing states, though, and it seems that Donald's doing pretty good in the swing states. So I'd say, yeah, the odds of him winning a second term are better than 50-50 right now. And if he comes in, I just expect the usual shit show because he'll want to do his transactional stuff, basically beat up on allies instead of beating up on China, or maybe beat up on China and the allies. And meanwhile, the Pentagon and the State Department, everybody's going to be saying, no, you got to stick with the strategy. So, I don't, I think he pretty much, knuckled under to the blob, as they call it, in the second and third year of his first term, and I expect he'll do the same. He just, as long as he gets his cases dismissed, and he can fly Air Force One and eat Wendy's, he's going to be pretty happy. Everybody else will be going ape shit, but it's just going to be a shit show. That's my prediction.
Well, he said he want Taiwan to pay. I
And
think
TSMC
either
stock went.
I think somebody forget to debrief him. Taiwan is the biggest purchaser. Taiwan actually pays, unlike Israel.
Yeah,
Israel, we pay the money, we give them the weapons. Taiwan
yeah,
actually pay real hard currency for
yeah.
U.S. weapons, and they're one of the best customer for U.S. military industrial
We got
complexes.
money,
So
they
I
should
think.
pay. Yeah, But yeah, actually, they, for some bizarre reason, they were talking about doing away with that and giving Taiwan access to these U.S. government credits. But yeah, it's time to crank up the Taiwan lobby. I mean, they love Trump. I don't know if you remember how much they hated Biden, but they love their Trump, and I think that they'll work out an arrangement with him.
Well, I already seen some people. I mean, these are the people who are kind of adjacent to the U.S. military industrial intelligence complex are saying, oh, all these people in Taiwan and Hong Kong who are pro-Trump because they think Trump will be tough on China will be sorely disappointed because Trump he's ready to sell out. He's a businessman.
Yeah.
We saw that those same kind of concerns in Trump's first term. They were really
Mhm.
worried that Trump might make a deal with China where they're gonna trade away Taiwan for some Chinese concessions. Do you think that's
Mhm.
likely? Do you think
I mean,
that's likely?
what's there to trade? That's my, it's I'd say that I mean, more soybeans. We're going to give up. You're going to give up Taiwan for a couple shiploads of soybeans. I don't see it. I think that Trump's focus will be on keeping Peter Thiel and those weirdos out in Silicon Valley happy. So I really want to see what happens. It's really hilarious how you saw that he's going to. He said, "I'm not going to ban TikTok because I hate Facebook." you know, the next few years will be pretty entertaining.
Yeah, I think that's why people were surprised that Trump is popular on Chinese social media. I think what they don't realize is for a lot of the average Chinese people, this is entertainment for them because Trump is an entertainment
Yeah, exactly.
figure.
Yeah,
Especially compared to Biden. Biden is just a zombie. Like there's so much you can do to laugh at him being a zombie, but Trump is interactive. Um,
exactly. Yeah. Well, I hate to admit it. Yeah, he can be amusing, and I think that the U.S. MIC military industrial complex will basically be on automatic pilot, and as I said, more crises will appear, more crises will be addressed. The Trump would mess with the Japanese alliance. I can't see him doing that, and he'll. But everything else, I think, is up for grabs. He'll probably
well,
go to China. He'll probably
well,
go.
his VP pick JD Vance did say, you know, China is our biggest threat, and then he said then he said we gotta do something about Iran, like we can't just do this Mickey Mouse couple bombings on Iran. So it looks like what he want to do is pivot away from Ukraine war, which is what
Mhm.
Mearsheimer wants.
Yep.
So don't waste resources on Ukraine war anymore. Let Europeans deal with that. But
Mhm.
let's focus on Middle East to screw with Iran on behalf of
Yeah.
Israel, and then to pivot to Asia to
Yeah,
contain China.
I think that China would be happy to see America pull out of Ukraine because that basically puts Europe up for grabs again. I mean, Europe is, you know, I wouldn't say flat on its ass, but Europe has a host of problems. And one of the reasons that we had the IMEC India corridor was supposed to make up for you lost Russia. We're telling you to decouple from China, but look at this, you got India. Now there's no India. So I think that what really makes strategists nervous is the idea that we wash our hands of Ukraine. So there's some sort of peace settlement there, and then all the Europeans wake up and say, "Hey, didn't those guys bomb Nord Stream? I mean, the United States. Let's pivot back to China, and that sort of thing. And the Chinese will be ready for that. So that would be probably good for the world, because it certainly would be good for Europe. And I think that if that is an area where Trump and could make a difference. I don't care about JD Vance. Nobody listens to the vice president. He goes to funerals. Look what happened to Mike Pence. He escaped the hanging. That was his achievement. That was on the list of his achievements after his term. So yeah. But I'd say that basically because the Democrats spent 4 years trying to fuck Trump on Russia and Ukraine. I'd say the Ukraine war team has a lot to worry about. But that might be the biggest change, and that would be good for China.
Hmm. Wow. Okay. I think we cover a whole breadth of topic from Ukraine to Taiwan to Trump to Saudi Arabia. Is there anything else you want to talk about, Peter? Anything you want to
Oh,
promote?
oh no, actually, I find, you know, um, I find it a relief every once in a while not to talk about China. You know, that's why my most recent post was on Genghis Khan's tomb. I loved writing that piece. But yeah, actually, the last thing I'd like to leave with you is that I think that what the American public sphere is lacking is a discussion of China's resilience when it comes to restrictions on their oil imports. You know, we all talk about how wonderful it is that China's going green. It's doing all that solar. It's doing all that wind. It's doing all that nuclear. It's building those EVs. But what that is also doing, it's making China, it's making it easier politically for China to weather a war scenario with the United States because you know
I
the yes.
I
Yeah.
now you make me remember because China just reported they have been stockpiling grains. I mean,
Yeah.
they're gonna
Stockpiling
that's
everything.
yeah. There's no
Oh,
because that's one of the things that China most worry about is food self
yeah.
sufficiency, of course, because
Mhm.
possibly if their sea route get disrupted. So China have been, one of the policies. This was a couple of years ago, like a big controversial policy in China. Actually, was they're trying to increase the acreage under cultivation.
Mhm.
Because for a long time the trend has been other way because as China industrialized, a lot of the
Mhm.
land are being allowed to be fallow. That's why China is literally turning green because as people moving to the cities, a lot of the countryside are the forests are coming back and everything. But just a few years ago, Xi Jinping came out with this policy about expanding uh, the cover of cultivation. And then I think it's the purpose is also strategic. They're preparing in case for war. And you're absolutely right about China's big switch to sustainable energy is because they're building tons of solar, wind, hydro, nuclear, and they're putting big into EV. That means they're going to have less reliance on foreign oil. Because China has a lot of coal.
Mhm.
They can produce. They can have all these different ways of producing electricity, including fire power plants, and then those can power their cars. 60% I think of the crude oil import from China that goes into vehicle traffic. So
Mhm.
so this is this. So the cleaning up air, that's just a bonus. That's just the ice on the cake for the Chinese. Yeah, and yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that. Like the environmental benefit, that's just a nice to have. But
Yeah.
really, it's about energy self sufficiency, and they don't have to constantly worry about U.S. Navy cutting off the Strait of Malacca. But
Mhm.
I don't even know how a blockade in Strait of Malacca is going to work because I have seen pictures of Strait of Malacca. There's like tons of ships at there
Mhm.
any time of the day. I mean, U.S. Navy is just gonna park there and board every ship and check where their destination is gonna go. That's not just gonna stop traffic to China. That's gonna stop traffic to like half of the world. I mean,
Oh,
like a lot of. I mean, they're gonna stop the world trade at the Strait of Malacca. I don't know. I don't know if they thought this through, how they're gonna actually implement the blockade. But anyway,
yeah.
hopefully we don't.
Maybe they'll have to outsource it to the Houthis, you know? Just, those guys out there and sinking, Chinese, carriers. But I guess the last thought I would leave you with is that, one of the, what I look at, what I'm starting to look at is, one of the, unintended consequences of decoupling, as we call it. It's basically we lie when we're saying we're not decoupling from China. We're trying to decouple from China and make it easier to fight a war with China and reduce the collateral damage, to our economy and to our allies. and make them more eager to participate in a China war over Taiwan, particularly, or something else. But the thing that I think about more and more now is that A, China is muscling up, and B, decoupling also reduces the incentives for strategic restraint by China. So we always used to say, well, China, you kick them in the nuts, and maybe one of these days they'll kick back. But I think we have to start thinking or speculating irresponsibly about the day when China says, I'm going to make a move because I have enough power now to break the United States in East Asia. And, you know, um, it's now time to show who's really running the show out there.
Is this why? Is this why they're talking about deploying tactical nukes to Pacific? You think? I
Yeah, you
mean,
got
like
it.
that's
Yeah, we're basically we're on the that phrase escalation dominance, right? That's where China builds an aircraft carrier, we send 3 aircraft carriers. China does nukes, so we send in, we send in tactical nukes. But yeah, there's uh, you know the United States has always relied on escalation dominance to be able to deter. But my feeling is that by a combination not just of technical and military, but also economic and diplomatic factors, that the United States might not enjoy escalation dominance. Now, that's already happening to a certain extent in the South China Sea. As the Philippines are pulling all this crap down there, like, oh, let's send in the cameras and let's send in the boat and fuck with these Chinese vessels. And the Chinese have been return have absolutely flooded the zone, and recently I think they sent the Liaoning down there with a task force. So used to be parity. You do this, I do something similar. Now it's you do this, I'm going to do more than you, that kind of thing. So
or U.S. actually backed down because Blinken was down there before. He said the U.S. Philippine Security Pact covers everything around Philippines, including South China Sea. But now they're kind of backpedaling. They're saying, "Oh, it only covers the pre-1951 Philippine territory, which would exclude
oh,
the,
that I can't believe they
Second
said that.
Thomas."
Now I got to go and find that, because that's
Yeah.
huge. Because there's this, Marcos legislated this whole grab of the South China Sea and called it Philippine territory. Well. Yeah, so
Yeah, so I mean, like it looks to me there's are already paddling. I mean, what can they do? Are they going to send the U.S. Coast Guard in to confront the Chinese Coast Guard to have a water cannon fight? I mean, I just don't see how this is gonna, how U.S. is gonna get involved in this
Well, the
without.
US already got its big ask. It was able to get back into those 10 bases, the EDCA bases, and also the Japanese are now part of it, and the Japanese are going to be part of Balitakot. But I think that pretty much maxes out the bennies for for the Philippines. So I think the Chinese are, they wouldn't hesitate. I shouldn't say that. They would be very willing to consider pushing the US to the wall if the US tries to pull any more stunts in the South China Sea through the Philippines.
Well, let's hope at least the Trump administration will bring some changes because we're talking about nuclear brinksmanship here. I mean, like both
True.
in
Yep.
Ukraine and in South China Sea, which is really nuts.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, maybe a civil war in the US will take the edge off that. Who knows?
I don't think we're there yet. I mean, if even like a lot of people are saying if Trump didn't turn his head and got his brain shot out, there will be a civil war. I think there will be a total chaos, a total pandemonium. But I don't know if
There would have been a civil war on Twitter.
yeah, exactly. There will be a civil war on Twitter for sure, and TikTok. But
Yeah.
I don't think there's gonna be. I don't know. I just don't see a real kind of like 1860 type of scenario
Yeah.
in US. I don't see that
I
happening.
don't either,
Well,
but there's
this
always the first time.
well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Peter, if people want to find you, find your work, where do they go?
Okay, well, I have a Patreon. It's called Peter Lee's China Threat Report, and it needs subscribers, so please be generous. And also, I'm always on Twitter, unfortunately, or X as we call it, and my handle there is at chinahand. And so I look
That's a
forward to seeing your viewers and listeners there.
That's the best handle, man. China hand. You are lucky to lock that down early.
Uh,
Thanks everyone for tuning in. Peter Lee, ladies and gentlemen, go check out his Patreon. Go check out his Twitter feed.